welcome to another episode, another week of Bench Opinions. We're starting this week with our football segment just because we thought that it definitely makes more sense to get the more pressing matters out first. So like, comment, subscribe if you're enjoying the content. Share it with your friends.
And there's just a general fatigue then, from Klaus. I want Klaus at the top of his game for this football segment, And if we go through all the other segments first, then I feel like Klaus is not on his tippy toes there.
I don't think that's going to change. Let's see.
7 months of doing this podcast, and there was a slight increase of your interest in football, and now it's just fucking tanked again to absolute zero.
Some would say it's because he chose Spurs, but
It was only because I sometimes had to sort of talk about things more. But now with you guys, it's fine. You guys can have a nice chat.
Yeah.
I can sit here and listen, educate myself.
Yeah, and you did very well with always just one of us. There's 3 of us back in the podcast today. Very excited that we're all back together, and it's good that there's 2 of us who are very interested in football for the football segment. I want to talk about the new Champions League format, which we haven't touched on in this podcast at length. Maybe first of all, Dom, what is your general attitude towards the new format?
Brilliant. And I think generally with UEFA, I think I've said it before, and even FIFA, like anything they tend to do, I'm very skeptical because they're not, I wouldn't say that they put the fans first 90% of the time. But I think this format really, the biggest beneficiaries are the fans. I think it's so exciting, particularly throughout the group phase. I used to hate about the group phase is that, with the way the groups were put together and the rankings were done, is that a lot of the time after sort of 3 game weeks,
you knew who was progressing.
So you had a lot of dead rubber matches towards the end. And with the way the format happened now is like there was most of the teams had a chance to sneak into playoffs until the last week. So that's great. And then I think now it's knockout football, and knockout football is always exciting.
Yeah. How is the format different, or how does the format work?
So it used to be traditional sort of pools and knockout. So teams were drawn into pools beforehand based on their rankings. And now it's one big league phase. With individual matches drawn out beforehand, so you play. I think you play 8 matches in the
games.
league phase.
Yeah, and it's still ranked. So you still have tiers within that table, and you play a certain amount of teams from
each
this
tier,
that tier, and that tier. So there's I think each team plays 2 really big teams, and then 2 lower teams, and so it's a good spread.
And after that, it goes into a bracket knockout, leading to a final, and that is in all 3 European competitions, the Champions League, the Europa League, and the Conference League. We are at the quarterfinal. No, we're at the knockout.
The round of 16.
Round of 16 at the moment. The way that the league format worked was sort of that some clubs will feel that they got a bit hard done by in the round of 16 knockout. Liverpool played PSG, which the Liverpool were almost unbeaten other than that last game against PSV. And PSG are one of the informed sides in Europe. So I know a lot of Liverpool fans felt a little bit hard done by, but it seems like a bit of a nothing argument if you think of you're going to have to play top sides to become Champions League winner.
Yeah, what I also like about this format is that, if you look at some of the teams that have gotten through, like Villa have really been rewarded for good form in the group stages. Yeah. Whereas if you look at the old format, if Villa got drawn with Real Madrid, for example, in the group phase, the chances of them winning their group and from being promoted as the first team out of that group was very low. Yeah. And that means they would have just been drawn against someone really good in this next phase. And that means these guys are crashing out at sort of the first asking once they get to knockout. Now, if you look at it, Villa had one of the best runs in the group phase, and they've come into the first knockout phase now playing Club Brugge. And they beat Club Brugge. Yeah. And, now all of a sudden you're looking at Villa having a real chance at sort of making a run at it, which I think is quite cool because it used to be sort of a foregone conclusion a lot of the time. Or at least it felt like it.
Yeah, it seemed like 95% it was always the same teams making the knockouts. Now you've got some great stories of clubs going further, but I think if we go into the Champions League and where it's at now, the second legs will start tonight when this podcast comes out. You've got Arsenal that have swept aside PSV in the first leg already. I think that's a foregone conclusion.
Yeah, quite surprising how easy it was. I mean, it's been a great year for Dutch teams in European competition, that has to be said. Feyenoord and PSV making it through, which is pretty rare. And then, Ajax also through to the next round of 16 in the Europa Leagues, and Alkmaar as well doing quite well.
Yeah.
So, that's good. But 7-1 away from home, that was just a complete collapse.
Especially
from
since Arsenal don't have an out-and-out striker and have been criticised in the past months for
failing to sign one.
And failing to be creative enough in front of goal. Thank God they put that all back in order against United, but we'll get to that later. Atletico went down to Real Madrid, but that tie is definitely still alive.
Yeah.
I think 2-1.
It's an interesting
Real Madrid
one because it's like, both games feel like home games to a certain degree. I mean, there's not much travel involved. That's some of the things that makes the Champions League difficult sometimes. So
Same goes for Liverpool PSG. Liverpool, daylight robbery, got away with a 1-0 victory. Klaus and I were watching that on the couch here. Klaus wasn't really watching, but he'd look up every now and again and see Liverpool's keeper Alisson sort of scrambling in front of his goal. But stats don't win you matches.
Goals do.
Yeah.
We've also said it all season, though, that that's one thing that Arne Slot has been able to do with Liverpool is get results. So continues.
But PSG definitely still have the chance to beat them at Anfield. Villa versus Bruges. Villa seem to be in control of that tie. Barcelona Benfica, also another one that I think is still...
Just don't see I don't see Benfica. I think Barcelona will get the job done at the Camp Nou.
Lille Dortmund is an interesting one just because Dortmund aren't really on form and Lille have been a pretty solid side this year.
Yeah.
So I don't think Dortmund are guaranteed at all to progress.
I
from
think
that.
for the neutral, probably the most exciting game in this part of the competition now, because I think the teams are so evenly matched.
Yeah, and then another little German derby, Leverkusen versus Bayern, first and second in the Bundesliga, but Bayern swept them aside quite convincingly in the first leg.
Yeah, I
Red
think
card for Leverkusen.
Keep an eye on that, because I think Company, if Company does somehow manage to get that team working, they can very much win the Champions League, and that would be unbelievable.
Yeah. And then Inter versus Feyenoord. Inter, I think, are also sort of in control of that one. So looking at those teams and the standings after the first leg, Dom, if you had to pick the two teams that are playing in the final right now, who would you go with?
Real Madrid, Bayern.
Real Madrid, Bayern.
And only because, Real Madrid only because of they're just serial winners of this competition, and Ancelotti just knows how to get the job done. It's just unbelievable how they function in this competition.
Yeah.
And I think Bayern Munich, just because if I look at that draw at the bottom half, it looks pretty favorable. I think Inter are a dark horse. I don't know. Barcelona have a couple of years ahead of them under Flick to get to winning, and then the rest is, it's the bottom half is definitely more attractive, I would say.
Yeah. I think there could be some interesting matchups in the quarterfinal stage with Arsenal potentially taking on Real Madrid or Atletico. And then, the rest, like you said, isn't that interesting. But when it gets to the semi-final stage, definitely more so. Let's get to the Europa League. Similar setup there. A few big clubs left. We've got Tottenham, Alkmaar, Ajax, Frankfurt, Olympiacos. Who else? Rangers are still in it. Roma.
Yeah.
So there's definitely some name clubs, and your boys, United, are still in it.
Yeah, look, Europa, for anyone that doesn't know, winning Europa gets you into Champions League, and a lot of the time, particularly in recent years, that's gotten teams into the Champions League the following season who probably wouldn't have qualified for the Champions League. So that's really attractive, and that brings a lot of money. I mean, I heard a story this week that Amorim wasn't too keen on prioritizing this competition, but he's pretty much been told that if you do get us into the Champions League, you have £100 million extra to spend in the summer. So that's the financial upside to it. So I think for United, that's the no-brainer. But there's a couple of banana peels there, I think. But generally speaking, the same there. I think I'm going to ask you, who do you think is going to get through the top half and the bottom half there to get into that final?
Oh, I think I like Frankfurt. It's a big game for them against Ajax. Tottenham, I don't believe in at all. So I think from that top part, I think Frankfurt and Lazio are in the semi-finals. Bottom part is a little bit tougher because I'm not too sure how Roma is playing, how Lyon's playing. You guys have a big game to get past Sociedad in the return leg. But I wouldn't be surprised if it was something like Fenerbahce is also in it. Maybe Roma against United in the semi-finals.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be great for you guys to get that far.
I think so. And it obviously depends for us. For United, it definitely depends on on injuries and the way the season progresses. But we also will be able to throw the kitchen sink at this as the season progresses. I don't know if that can be said for a lot of the other clubs. I don't know, but for us, our season's a write-off, so that makes this maybe something that one can try and throw the kitchen sink at. But you look at it, and I think this must be one of the weakest Europa League. Europa leagues at this stage that I can remember in the last few years.
There's some traditional clubs in there, some big name clubs, but I think it's not, because a lot of them are still in the Champions League. I suppose you also don't have, like in previous years, where some people would drop out of the Champions League at a later rate and still go into the Europa
they've
League.
done away with that completely.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I think it's good too, because it's also just like, how many chances do you want to give clubs? And I think if you're really looking to promote European competition amongst Europe's leagues, then put teams in and give them a chance to try and win something.
So it'd be nice, I guess, for you guys to get to that final, just to give you guys a chance. And lastly, the Conference League. We're not going to go through the teams left there, because I don't think I could pronounce half of them. I think Chelsea are the sort of main favorites in that one. The only really big name clubs. I mean,
You've got Betis there, but I mean, look, if Chelsea don't win this, I think it's would be a bit criminal. I think, looking at that, you've got teams. All the teams are from outside Europe's 5 top leagues, pretty much. Outside of Real Betis and Chelsea, every other team is from. I mean, it's insane. Some of those teams that are there. So I think from that point of view, Chelsea need to get it across the line. Unfortunately for them, you just don't have that carrot that the Europa League brings. And they need to qualify for Champions League football with the amount of money they've spent. So they might be distracted by what's going on domestically. Yeah.
I want to transfer into the next segment by sort of asking you both a question that I saw posted online. Or I saw a podcast in the US talk about how Europe needs to adopt more of a playoff attitude, because playoffs, 1, generate a lot more interest and money, and 2, just sort of give the end of a league or a season a different meaning in terms of who can still qualify and win a tournament. The NFL obviously does it. I think most American sports do league and then playoff. Do you think something like the Premier League should consider a playoff for the victor? Let's say the normal season goes from August till March, and then there's 2 months of playoffs after that. Do you think that would be something worth considering?
I'll let the non-football man start with his thoughts.
Well, I'm a little bit confused, because the playoffs are in NHL, for example, NBA is literally just a seven game sort of knockout round.
You'd play the season, and then the top 8 teams, for example, would go into a playoff to try and determine who the winner of the league is.
We're talking about Premier League, not the European competition.
Right. So that's essentially what they do.
That's why I was confused. I was like, well, that is a playoff.
Yeah, that's what they're doing.
Knockout,
Should a league consider the same to make the end of the season a little bit more interesting, if there is the chance that it's a dead rubber? Liverpool aren't mathematically champions yet, but they're sort of running away with it, which means that the interest in that is not as high as, for example, in the Championship, where the first 2 teams qualify automatically and then there's a playoff for the 3rd spot.
I'd say yes, because this is something that Dominic and I were talking about last week in the podcast when we were talking about football, and like, if there's still any interest left in a team finishing 2nd or 3rd, which Dominic then educated me on, yes, it is important for the Champions League, but other than that, for that league itself, it's irrelevant. So that league itself loses a bit of spice.
I can only speak for. There are a couple of leagues in Europe that do it. So the Greek league does it, the Belgian league does it, and there'll be 2 or 3 more that do it. And having spoken to people that are big fans of those leagues that come from there, they believe it's a bit of a joke.
Yeah.
So there's this element of like, you go through a long season, you get to the top of the league, and they feel like it's a bit of a roll of the dice. But I guess it's which side of the traditionalist sense, like fence do you sit? Because for me, and we spoke about this last week about like hierarchies of events. The football, like the Premier League, is so universally seen in England as like the pinnacle.
Yeah,
and I think it is a pinnacle because of that sustained success over 38 games.
Yeah,
and I think you might lose that, but I think in terms of excitement, and if you're looking at that purely from like how do we get excitement and interest in it, then it's a no-brainer to do it like that, is to get into playoffs.
And I think you guys discussed it last week. Those sort of leagues where, in most cases, it's almost a foregone conclusion before it started. Will, like, the German league does have different winners, but in most cases it's Bayern. The French league is something similar, with PSG winning a lot of the time. When you have a playoff ending to a season, a lot of things can happen in a one-off playoff or even a two-leg one, just giving other teams a chance. But I do agree with you. It's kind of tough to let a team go 32 games in a year and then say at the end it doesn't matter if you finish first or eighth, because eighth team is now going to be crowned the champion of the league.
Yeah, but then you look at other sports and they do the same thing. NBA is the same, NHL is the same. You
I mean,
play
there's no chance that they're going to change it.
No,
but I thought
also
it was
because logistically it's impossible now, particularly in the English pyramid, because they don't have enough weeks as is.
Yeah.
And then that means you would have to make the league smaller, because most of the leagues that do it in Europe are the smaller leagues, because they have time. So like in Austria, they do it as well. I think they only have 12 teams in the first division in Austria. So to extend the season, it's almost like they have to do it, because otherwise the season would be 4 months long, you know. And then if you add to that Salzburg are always 45 points ahead of everyone else, it feels like after the third week, sometimes it feels like the other teams are doing an economics test and there's negative marking, because I'm like, how is it December and Salzburg are 43 points ahead of the team is next, you know. I mean, it's obviously not that dramatic, but you know what I mean. So I think that's also just, it's never going to happen.
just an interesting thought.
For sure.
And it's
So knockout sport is completely different to like
It is.
round-robin sport, right?
It is. Good transition into the next thing, which is the Americanization of football, which is, I guess, what you would consider non-American.
Soccer.
Soccer. The news coming out that FIFA is going to introduce halftime shows moving forward at the World Cup finals. So for those of you that are not familiar, so because you're living under a rock, halftime shows have become famous from the Super Bowl, with, I guess, the attraction that a lot of people actually only watch the Super Bowl, if you're not interested in football, to watch the halftime show, because the acts, the performances are usually quite memorable. It's, I guess, a move by FIFA to try and copy and paste that success. So yeah, first thoughts about that.
How much time do they have in the Super Bowl, and how much time
I
do
think
you
they
have?
have half an hour in the Super Bowl, and they have got 15 minutes in the Football World Cup. So it's,
I mean, just the fact that you need to set up a stage and then do
I
the
don't think
performance,
it's a
break it
stage.
down.
I think it's just Chris Martin from Coldplay standing in the middle with a guitar and one lady dancing next to him.
I mean, that's not that's not a halftime show.
My question is, are they going to do away with the very strange fucking closing ceremonies that they used to do?
Oh yeah,
Because they were very weird. Opening ceremonies I got and I loved, because I was like, they're setting the tone.
Yeah.
Everyone's excited. It's the beginning of a tournament. There's no football World Cup fatigue. Everyone's like, yeah, let's go.
Yeah.
No one's tired of the World Cup song yet.
All the teams are there.
Yeah, everyone's there, like, cool. But what I don't get is the closing ceremony. To me is just like, yes, okay, we've heard this fucking song for 6 weeks now. We know.
Except for the South African World Cup.
Yeah, but everything South African's better, so we can do that more often. But what I'm saying is, like, if they do away with that, and then there's like this, it's the thing about FIFA is I find them so, for such a massive organization that have so much power, it's so not innovative.
Yeah.
It's so yeah.
I've been fighting with the same idea, because initially when I heard it, I was like, this is dumb. It's dumb that they're doing exactly the same as the Super Bowl, because I don't think it's going to work the same. Logistically, it's a completely different setup, unless they extend halftime, which was also dumb. But then I was like, well, does it really matter? Does it matter that at halftime of the World Cup, Rihanna plays 3 songs? No. The stadium's going to be empty, because in a football stadium, everyone goes at halftime to go pee and to buy more beer, but maybe it'll get them more TV money.
Not if it's in Saudi Arabia.
No.
Though. Then everyone's there.
But also the cultures are completely different.
They are.
The Americans are all about that entertainment factor, and the rest of the world gets the entertainment from the sport itself.
Yeah, you can't see the German hooligans in the way end enjoy the.
Dude, you see them singing to Helena Fischer, bro.
My question is, what are all the old washed-up former footballers going to do at halftime if they're not pundits?
Yeah, well,
It eats out all the analysis time.
I think that'll still take place, but I thought it was an interesting one. Apparently, Coldplay or Chris Martin is leading the scouting for who's gonna perform. And I was thinking to myself, sort of, why not make it the whole World Cup then, and just have like a halftime show? Then you could really max out your earnings if you during the whole World Cup you had halftime shows. But I don't think FIFA can afford that.
No.
Yeah.
Unless in the group stage it's almost like an open mic night where people can sign up and play their own songs.
But maybe they actually break even then for a non-profit organization.
Well, listen,
instead of making massive profits.
Talking about FIFA finances, it's a very nice segue into what we're next going to talk about, which is the new FIFA Club World Cup setup.
Fucking stupid.
The Club World Cup in the past, or currently up until this year, has always been the 7 teams from the what do they call the federations?
Yeah, the continental
winners
competitions. Yeah,
playing in a short 2-week. 3-week tournament to determine who is the best team out of what the equivalent of a Champions League would be in Africa, South America, North America, Asia. And the new format is that 32 teams will play once every 4 years, like a World Cup, will play a World Cup sort of format, meaning that your winners of the Champions League, for example, from, let's say, 2021 to 2025, those winners will all play in this year's Club World Cup in June in the USA. And it'll be played like a traditional World Cup. The breakup is, I think there's 12 teams from UEFA, so it'll be the winners plus teams that are ranked. I actually can't see the screen at all. It's way too small. But there's obviously, I think there's 4 teams from Africa.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting one. It's, on the one hand, it's taken away that there's a Club World Cup every year, which was quite a distraction for a lot of people, and no one really got into it. If your team won it, you would definitely add the trophy to your trophy list and say we won 4 or 5 trophies this year. If you didn't win it, no fan cared. No one.
Yeah. Look, again, I have similar. I think within the context of global football, I think a Club World Cup is got a lot of problems. First of all, just logistically, I just think it's more football for these clubs, and I think players, and also just even if you speak to any sort of sports scientists, are saying the injuries are just going to increase. There's too much football being played, etc., etc. In my opinion, they should really start looking at changing the size of squads, the amount of substitutes. Anyway, but I digress. What I do like about this format, though, is if you're going to do it, then do it properly. Is it actually gives all the clubs there a better chance at competing, because the old format was the African team would play against the CONCACAF team sort of early on against each other. So they'd play the low-ranked teams first, and then the higher-ranked teams would come in.
Europe would add later and only play like a semi-final.
Yeah, and you virtually had no real chance of winning. If, now I look at a team like Mamelodi Sundowns, I'm like, oh, cool. They're
playing against Dortmund.
Yeah, they're playing against Dortmund, they're playing against Fluminense, and who knows, they could get a result.
Yeah.
If, you get a draw and you beat one of the other teams, and before you know it, you're in, you can have a run at it, and there's actually it's a tournament. It's not just a flash in the pan. But I ask myself how this is supposed to fit into the global footballing calendar.
The carrot that FIFA has dangled for these teams to compete is that it's a $2 billion prize fund.
2 billion?
Yeah.
Where did they get that money from?
Are they going to bribe people
Klaus, when you earlier said that this non-profit organization...
I meant that sarcastically.
Yeah. They have a lot of money. And what's his name?
What are you going to tell me next? The main sponsor is the Catholic Church, or what?
But if Bayern Munich win it...
No, it's not. It's not.
Then it's going to start another kettle of fish.
The winning team doesn't get all the money, but just to partake, you get a lot of cash already.
Yeah.
And all of the famous words of the FIFA president is, all the funds generated by the Club World Cup will be fed back into the footballing ladder. That means that every association, federation will benefit from the Club World Cup, because FIFA will not keep a dime from this, they've said.
Sure, buddy.
Sure, buddy.
Sure, buddy.
In 10 years, we'll see this guy on the face of a newspaper because he's corrupt as all hell.
Cool story.
On that subject, though, did you? What's his face?
Sepp Blatter.
He showed up at hearing this week and looked
He looks finished.
terrible. The poor guy. Yeah. That corrupt, it weighs on you.
So yeah, this summer there's a Club World Cup. Dom
Stresses you out.
alluded to it already. It's just a lot more football. I've never complained about more football because I'm a fan, but I do see that there's a pitfall here because clubs want to win, so they'll always select the same team, which means players really are used like cannon fodder.
Just don't feel like Pep's whining, to be honest. He just whines.
To be fair, Jurgen Klopp used to be a big whiner about fixture congestion.
But he wasn't a cheat.
No. Right, and I think on that bombshell, it's
Speaking of, quickly we touched on it. It's a pleasure.
Oh yeah. Dom's United did us another big favor. Although these days I don't think you can even claim anything anymore. I think Arsenal are just stumbling over their own feet.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Did you see Arteta after the game run out of that press conference?
Run out because they asked him if the league title is over, and he said now's not the time to talk about it.
He evac'd.
Yeah.
But at 15 points, even though they have a game in hand at 15 points, I think it's donesies.
It's a lot. Yeah. Liverpool's running is tough, but they've lost one game all season, and I think they'd have to lose 5 or 6 more for it to become close again, and Arsenal would have to win every game. Yeah. So I think a little bit of a foregone conclusion. Very excited to see who makes it into the top 4 because that race is extremely close.
Yeah.
And I think the last relegation spot is also still tight, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, although Wolves getting another result against Everton now has kind of moved them, I think, 4 or 5 points up ahead of Ipswich, which is a bummer, and a lot can happen. But I think the new Wolves coach has really got them playing way more compact and good football. So let's see how that happens. Hoping a great win for Nottingham. Just to touch on that briefly, great win for them against City as well, and that continues. And they look nailed on to get a Champions League spot, which is insane.
Yeah. We'll discuss who got past in the Champions League next week and also maybe some more Premier League results next week. We might even get the chance before the end of the season to touch on a few other leagues, something like the second Bundesliga and the Bundesliga.
Yeah.
Just a lot to fit into a small segment. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks.
Bye.